Walking around this housing estate in Kensington, there are some hints at a past life. Old bluestone paths, hardwood fencing, beautiful mature peppercorn trees, and a clock tower. This area dates much further back than the modern townhouses and apartments you see before you. In fact, this used to be one of the largest livestock markets in the world. I love finding out the hidden history around places where people live, especially when housing estates are built on sites with significant former uses. Melbourne has a lot of these. Housing has been built where stadiums, drive-in theatres, prisons, factories, and quarries all used to operate. So I'm starting a series called Former Lives of Housing Estates. The first video in this series will focus on the historic Newmarket Saleyards, which operated for 126 years before becoming the Kensington Banks and Lynch's Bridge housing estates. These were some of the earliest large-scale regeneration projects in Australia. Before I get stuck into the history of the Saleyards, I found an interesting tidbit about the Newmarket area. I always assumed Newmarket was its own suburb, but it's actually a neighbourhood within Flemington. The name dates back to the 1840s, when Melbourne's livestock markets were located around where Queen Victoria Market is today. As Melbourne grew during the gold rush, those markets became overcrowded and more houses were being built around them. The Melbourne City Council decided to move the livestock markets further out to what was then the edge of Melbourne. Flemington was still lightly populated at the time, separated from the city by swampy ground. The replacement markets were called the Newmarket Saleyards, essentially a new market for livestock. The name eventually spread to the train station, the pub across the road, and the wider locality. In 1856, the Melbourne City Council was granted land for the development of the Newmarket Saleyards. The first sales were held in 1859, with the official opening following in 1861 alongside the Melbourne City Abattoirs, which were a council-run meat processing facility located next door to the Saleyards. The site expanded significantly over the following decades, eventually containing thousands of pens and loading ramps and holding yards. This administration building was built in 1874. It's now a community high school. And the clock tower here was added in 1939. The extension of the Essendon railway line in the 1870s allowed livestock to be transported directly between regional producers, the Saleyards, and the abattoirs. If you travel along the Craigieburn line today, you can still spot the old clock tower as you pass Newmarket Station. By 1888, almost 500,000 animals were passing through Newmarket each year. In 1944, the Saleyards set a world record for sheep sales, with more than 6.5 million sheep passing through. At its peak, Newmarket was called a town within a town. It had the sounds and smells of the country in the hustle and bustle of the city. There were thousands of workers here and at the city abattoirs. Meatworks, tanneries, soapworks, and other related industries surrounded the Saleyards, and pubs and cafes opened along Racecourse Road to serve workers. Generations of families found employment through the industry. The Saleyards also shaped the surrounding suburbs. Workers built small cottages nearby, while wealthier people connected to the industry, like auctioneers, agents, and cattle breeders, sought fresh air further north, building themselves mansions in Ascot Vale, Moonee Ponds, and Essendon. The livestock industry also spread to the other side of the Maribyrnong. In 1905, William Angliss established the Angliss Meatworks in Footscray, within eyeshot of the Saleyards. Known locally as the Angies, it grew to an enormous enterprise, employing thousands of people and supplying meat locally and overseas. The meatworks even provided food rations for troops during World War II. While the meatworks are now long gone, you might be interested to know that Angliss's legacy continues through the William Angliss Institute today. The Maribyrnong and surrounding parklands also played an important role in the livestock industry. Newell's Paddock, on the opposite side of the river and right next to the meatworks, was used as a holding area before animals were moved to Angliss Meatworks. Today, it has been transformed into wetlands protecting the natural waterholes that existed before European settlement. To connect the Saleyards and Newell's Paddock, this stock bridge was built in 1941. Today, it's used by cyclists and pedestrians instead of livestock. Fairburn, Aberfeldy and Maribyrnong parks were also significant in their own right. It wouldn't be unusual to see animals resting here after a long journey to the city before heading to the Saleyards. Lastly, there's Lynch's Bridge. Before the current bridge, this site was home to Lynch's Punt, a cable ferry established in 1849 by Michael Lynch. After petitioning for a permanent crossing, Lynch eventually built his own bridge and charged a toll. It took until the 1880s for the bridge to come under public ownership. Although the structure has changed over time, the Lynch's Bridge name remains. It's also the name of one of the housing estates built on the former Saleyards site, which I'll get to shortly. Over time, the Saleyards began to have a negative impact on the surrounding area. Waste from the Saleyards, abattoirs and nearby industries was discharged into the Maribyrnong River and Moonee Ponds Creek, and soon Flemington and Kensington were associated with pollution and noxious smells. Another issue was the movement of livestock through nearby residential streets. Drovers moving large herds through the neighbourhood often frightened local residents, and occasionally livestock would escape. One story shared by ABC's Landline recalled a group of cows breaking free, with one making it as far as North Melbourne and another ended up being held at Melbourne Zoo. It didn't take long for the council to introduce bylaws restricting stock movements to nighttime hours. And some relief did come in 1964 when a livestock overpass was constructed from the Newmarket rail siding across Racecourse Road to the Saleyards. Calls to close or relocate the Saleyards began as early as 1886, with the Argus reporting concerns that the Saleyards and abattoirs were a danger to public health. Alfred Deakin, who was the local council member at the time, unsuccessfully lobbied against further infrastructure for the Saleyards and the construction of the railway siding in 1887. These types of complaints continued well into the following century, with several proposed new locations including Tullamarine, South Kensington and Derrimut, none of which went ahead. It's been interesting learning about the relationship between the Saleyards and the local area. When the Saleyards were moved to this area, they were essentially on the edge of the city. They provided significant jobs and economic opportunities for people. But as the city grew around the Saleyards, they were increasingly seen as a blight. By the late 20th century, the livestock industry was changing and the land that the Saleyards were on had become incredibly valuable. Economic pressures, drought, the decentralization of livestock operations, and urban development all contributed to the decision to announce the closure of the Saleyards on the 30th of July 1985. Though protests and resistance meant this date was extended several times. After almost 130 years of cattle and stock trading, the facility fully closed on the 1st of April 1987. Much of the building materials and furniture of the Saleyards and abattoirs were recycled or sold to the public to raise money for the council, with the bluestone cobbles selling for $2.50 each, and some fence posts and railings turned into exclusive period furniture. The land was gradually redeveloped into a public and private housing estate, with the area northeast of Epsom Road named Lynch's Bridge and the area southwest of Epsom Road named Kensington Banks. The 80-hectare site was transformed into medium-density housing with more than 1,000 homes built. Now, you might be wondering about something I mentioned earlier. Wasn't Newmarket in Flemington? Why did the housing estate get named Kensington Banks? This took me a while to untangle. The boundaries between Kensington and Flemington have moved a few times over the years, and both suburbs have always shared close links. While the Newmarket neighbourhood is located in Flemington, the Newmarket Saleyards, where the neighbourhood got its name, were actually located in Kensington. When the land was redeveloped, one estate was named Kensington Banks to highlight its location next to the Maribyrnong and separate the new residential development from its history as saleyards and abattoirs, which didn't have the most favourable public perception. The project began in the late 1980s as a Victorian government urban regeneration project, before becoming a joint venture with developer Urban Pacific. The Lynch's Bridge site was bought by Pioneer Homes for $2 million and was converted into 50 three-bedroom townhouses, 10 of which were purchased by the state government for use as public housing. The Kensington Banks land was sold to developers in parcels a little later. Construction began in the 1990s and continued across the site for 11 years. One of the first things added after the closure of the Saleyards was the Women's Peace Garden. This garden was built in 1986 to commemorate the International Year of Peace. It was designed by a team of women who chose plants to fit with the colours of the women's movement, green, purple and white, and to symbolise remembrance. Soon after completion, the redevelopment was considered a huge success. The residential areas were described as some of the loveliest in Melbourne and a burgeoning bright face in an area once despised by most, except those who lived there. While the quality of some of the homes has been debated over time, I do think there's a great balance between walkability, density, and access to nature. To me, the public spaces are the estate's best features. The mature peppercorn trees from the old Saleyards give many homes views over the greenery and provide pedestrians an enjoyable shaded journey. I also think it was quite innovative that garages were tucked away in rear laneways as opposed to on the street. I think it goes a long way to improve the look and feel of the streets, even if there are a lot of parked cars around. While walking around, you can certainly see some historic motifs. The names of streets and paths reference the old saleyards and abattoirs, and there are some livestock sculptures and artworks dotted around. But the only real information you get about the history of the area is via some information boards that feel pretty sanitized. Of course, it makes sense why this has been done. Not everyone wants to read about the gritty and gruesome aspects of the site's history, but I still think it's a history worth telling. One academic, Jean Hillier, noted, "Regeneration projects like these may mask their grim legacy, but ghosts lurk beyond the cobbles." Along this theme, I learned that developers cherry-picked a few historical references as a form of advertising and marketing, highlighting the bluestone paths and established trees, but shying away from any real mention of what the function of the site used to be. It seems the Saleyards had such a reputation amongst the public that developers were trying to hide the fact that this was the same site. I particularly enjoyed the heritage walking trail, called the Stock Route Path. It follows the journey once taken by cattle and sheep as they move between the Saleyards, the Melbourne City abattoirs and the Angliss Meatworks. The route runs through the estate and beneath Epsom Road, which is where these mosaics by Elizabeth McKinnon show the animals that once passed through the area. Though the pavers you see are not necessarily original. Only around 1/3 of the bluestone pavers from the Saleyards were retained on site, and even less were kept in their original position. The stock route pavers were purposefully laid in uneven patterns to increase traction for stock, which wouldn't provide a very comfortable journey for pedestrians or cyclists. They were either shaved down or replaced by other pavers from the site. The only original buildings remaining on the site are the administration buildings I showed you earlier, along with the 1903 Gatehouse complex. This was redeveloped in the late 90s into townhouses by developer Rivoli. Some people have argued that these changes, the removal of the original pavers, the conversion of the gatehouse into housing, and the broader sanitization of the site, have stripped away much of the history here. It does seem to reflect a wider trend where the less attractive parts of a place's history can become hidden. As well as the parts that are more celebrated, there's no doubt this place had some unpleasant aspects, much of which I didn't even go into today. I don't necessarily have a strong opinion about whether the history has been stripped away, but I'd be interested to hear what you think in the comments. Today, Kensington Banks and Lynch's Bridge are very different from what once existed here. It's a world long since consumed under concrete and townhouses and new memories of all the families that now live here. I had a really nice time walking around and doing my research for this video. If you have any connection to the area or any stories from the Saleyards days, I'd love to see them in the comments below. If you haven't watched one of my videos before, I'm Ken and I make videos about history, infrastructure, architecture and the environment. If you'd like to support the channel and help me keep making videos like this, there's a link below where you can buy me a coffee. Thanks so much for watching and I'll see you in the next one.